from like summer to fall.
He's like, am I sick? Is the temperature changing? What is happening right now? Did my child get me sick again?
And from like summer. Yeah, I'm officially turning on my mini split heat in my room.
Yeah, I've got the space heater on down here right now.
Yeah. Hey, John, how's it going?
Hey guys, how are you? Good.
Good. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, John.
Hey.
Looks like we've got everyone on board. I'm going to get us started because I know we've got a lot to cover today.
Sounds good.
That's great.
All right. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Sure can.
Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Erica Mixon. I am content manager here at Blumira. And today we're having a webinar on FTC Safeguards and how to prepare for that upcoming deadline. And we've got quite a few experts with us today that are going to share their insight. We've got Matt Warner, the CTO and co-founder here at Blumira. Hey, Matt.
Hello, excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you. And we've got Chris Furner, who's a senior solutions engineer on our MSP team. Hey, Chris, how's it going?
Hey, good. How are you?
Good, good. Excited to have you on board.
Yeah.
And then we've got two external partners with us today. We've got Brad Nye, who is a principal security consultant at FR Secure. Hey, Brad, how's it going?
Good. It looks like I need to update my picture.
Yeah, you look just a tad different. Beard's a little bit longer, I guess, but still can see the face there. Well, thanks for joining us, Brad. We're excited to have you. And we've also got John Isaacson, who's a principal consultant at JTI Cybersecurity. Hey, John.
Hey guys, happy to be here. And yeah, I'll update my picture too. Not the same disparity as Brad's, but almost.
Exactly. Looks like you've got you were baby faced there. You know, now you've got some scruff.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
We only do that for the pictures.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, Chris, it looks like you're the only one without a beard, and well, not in the pictures, but in real life. You got to get on that.
Yeah, I know. It
You got some
happens
scruff
sometimes.
though.
Yeah, winter's coming.
You gotta gear up for winter.
Yep.
Well, I'm excited to have you all on board, and I know that you have various expertise with FTC safeguards and either helping your clients achieve the FTC safeguards compliance and helping them to meet that deadline, or to help that within your own organization. So we're excited to have you on board, and let's just jump right into it. So the FTC Safeguards Rule has existed for a while, right? But there have been some changes that organizations now need to comply with. Matt, you want to tell us a little bit about the history of that rule?
Sure. So FTC and the Graham GLBA, so the Graham-Leach-Billy Act from many years ago, it's about over 20 years old now, has essentially been driving these regulations associated with FTC. And now we're seeing the culmination of that. We saw this with HIPAA and high tech many years ago, and now we're starting to see it fall into additional industries now, where cybersecurity controls are being applied to additional industries. And here we're talking about a pretty large number of industries that hold consumer financial data. And we're coming up to that time where the government is applying specific safeguards that say need to be applied. You need to start looking at how you're going to meet those guidelines. What's going to happen if you get audited associated with them? And how is your organization going to kind of address them, respond to them, and be able to address that audit if you do run into it. So it's one of those long time coming things that will continue to grow and from a governmental point of view over time, but from the standpoint of organizations, how you're approaching your storage of consumer financial data, if you store consumer financial data, if you're part of this, that's a lot of what we'll talk about today. And a lot of it is around, is it safe? Do you have a process in place? Are you securing your organization? Do you know where you're going from a security perspective? And that's a tough thing for a lot of the industries that are involved, associated, and covered by the safeguard rule, generally speaking. Not something that's been forced into a lot of these organizations, I should say, over the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah, thanks for that overview, Matt. So one thing that you did mention, are you covered by this FTC safeguard rule? It's kind of difficult to potentially understand whether your organization is affected by this or not. So let's talk about who is affected exactly. John, do you want to jump into this?
Sure, yeah. So it actually expanded when they changed the rule last October, because previously it was just the sort of like auxiliary financial institution. So anybody that does financial stuff that's not a bank or a credit union or something like that, who was covered by GLBA. But now it's also going to affect, basically anybody that handles consumer non-public consumer information, which is, almost anyone that deals with the public. So like you've got on your list, car dealerships, mortgage lenders or brokers, tax prep firms. And CPAs, especially because of their kind of relationship with AICPA and like the SOC 2 framework. They've kind of been used to this stuff, but now tax prep firms who might not have a CPA, it might just be a handful of folks that prepare tax returns for people. They're gonna have to comply with this. So lenders, especially like payday lenders, check cashing stores, so like Check Cashing USA, the places that have the Western Union wire transfers and all that kind of stuff, collections agencies, credit counselors, financial advisors. So, it's not just the big SEC regulated brokerage firms anymore. Now it's even the independent financial advisors. So basically everybody except for banks and credit unions and the bigger loan institutions who have, quite frankly, much bigger problems to deal with anyway, as far as compliance goes.
Mm-hmm.
But it's much wider. Yeah, much wider than it used to be.
Yeah, thanks for that overview. And auto dealerships seem to be kind of the big one here. I know, John, you've talked about working with auto dealerships, and Brad, we were just talking about that before. Brad, what's been your experience so far helping these auto dealers to get that deadline figured out?
I mean, a lot of them are starting from scratch. They had very little. They haven't really been regulated, so they'll have vulnerability management, some technology with a MSP, doing firewall or endpoint protection, but the documentation and governance just does not exist. And that's a big part of what you're seeing here. And I saw somebody posted in the chat about student loans. If you take student loans, there's also, this is not a comprehensive list. So if you have any concern or thought, you better go check. There is a very comprehensive list on the FTC site.
That's good info. Thanks, Brad. So now it seems like we've got more of a handle on, who's affected, and feel free to keep the questions flowing either in the chat or in the Q&A. So the short answer for are universities affected is yes, if you take student loans. Is that correct?
That if you're handling financial data, then yes.
Okay, that's good to know. And all right, so that's all great info. And like I said, feel free to have those questions in the chat, in the Q&A, where we're going to be, engaging with you throughout. And something that we're going to focus on for the majority of this webinar is this checklist that we've built out for folks that need to comply to this deadline. And the deadline's coming up. It's December, it's October now, so you've got a couple months. But Chris, how long do you foresee organizations taking to plan out an FTC safeguard, a plan for this? Like, what is the timeline of how folks should be getting started and when they should start thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, I would start thinking about it now. The thing especially with technology service providers, MSPs, is that there's a there's a limited pipeline of labor that you have to complete these kind of projects. So I would definitely, be if you're on the on the customer side and these regulations apply to you, you should definitely be asking about it now. But if you're an MSP or a technology provider, you should be talking to your customers about it now, because you don't want to be doing this work in December. Nobody approves work in December. People don't want to work in December. And this comes up like December 9th. So at this point, really, MSPs and technology providers need to have a plan in place, a technology stack in place, and have a way to get this done efficiently. There's a lot of technology solutions here, but there's a lot of paperwork, people, process, and procedure things in here as well. So now is the time to start working on it. There's definitely still some time to get things done in time before the deadline, but it's not going to be a short process. You can deliver a lot of the technology solutions here pretty quickly. But there's definitely some procedure things, identifying the right responsible people, and that takes time. A lot of larger businesses, especially the auto dealers, probably have either inside or outside legal counsel that probably needs to sign off on this stuff too. So that kind of stuff, when you have to go through another third party and have them review documents, that just slows things down more. So now's the time to start working on it. I wouldn't start working on it on December 1st. Of course, December 1st is better than not doing it at all, but do it now.
I was just gonna quickly add to that also for the for the MSPs and the technology providers. It's not only important that you have a plan for your customers and the right tech stack to implement for your customers, but all of the policy and procedure and governance type stuff that your customers have to have, you have to have that in place also. So if you're an MSP and you don't have this formally documented and in place, that's also something that you want to get a jump on right away, because one of the requirements that your customer is going to have is to ensure that all of their vendors and service providers have an equivalent program with equivalent safeguards in place, and then contractually obligate them to do so. So I know I'm jumping ahead, but yeah, I mean, that's something that your customers as well as you and other vendors should start thinking about now.
Absolutely.
Really good point.
Yeah, this was something that John and I, we were getting ready for this early, probably 2013-ish, when HHS first started audits, quote unquote, started audits for HIPAA. Not very many people got hit by them, but there were a number of MSPs that got hit by HHS audits early in the process for HIPAA. And it was only because they held BAAs, business agreements, with those medical facilities. So I fully expect at one point or another, it'll surprise all of us. You'll get hit with an audit and you'll be expected to be able to respond to all these things in kind. So you're better off doing it now than you are doing it the moment you get that audit, because it's not fun to respond to an audit when you have not actually built the policies in place specific to what's being required here.
Yeah, and one thing to kind of tack onto this is it's not just the FTC with the third party. Department of Labor is now coming out with it for third party plan administrators, and so if you're an MSP, it's coming. You better get on top of it.
It's coming from all angles. Yeah. Because all of the it's amazing that it took so long for it to get from the big Target incident of 2012 to today, like the whole idea of vendor security.
Right.
But yeah, that's one of the big points that all of these regulations are hammering, is ensuring that not only you have security controls, but that your vendors do. And like Brad said, if it's not FTC, all of the other regulations are going to have the same type of stuff around vendor security and vendor management.
Good point. So I'd love to get into this this checklist that we've developed for organizations trying to comply with this with these safeguards. And the first one, the first part, it's in different categories. Required policies is the first one. So this is about documenting everything, making sure that you have all the policies in place to have an information security program that complies with these FTC safeguards. And the first thing on the list is a designated qualified individual. So I just launched a poll asking if you're working with an MSP, and something that we talked about before was that if you are working with an MSP, you need to make sure that designated qualified individual is internal. Is that correct, guys?
Yeah, the qualified individual has to be somebody who the business designates as responsible for meeting the requirements of the regulation. That qualified individual doesn't have to be specifically qualified with IT and security and all that kind of stuff. They're basically the responsible party in the business that has to make sure that all of the requirements are met. So that person can then delegate all of the technical stuff to the MSP or to their IT team or wherever it needs to go. But ultimately that they are responsible for meeting the requirements, not the MSP, not your IT provider. If it's an outside IT provider, it's this designated qualified individual.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that, because we get people saying, well, we can just hire you and that takes care of it, right? No, we'll help you, but it's your company. You have to have somebody named internally. And then, like you said, we'll, yourself or our, your resource provider can come in and provide additional support. But at the end of the day, you have to answer to it, not us.
Yep.
Not to drag it into a fully different direction, but as we've now seen, the government does care if you lie and make things up, as we've seen at Uber now. So it is important that you have this person, they know what they're doing, and you are moving forward with purpose around this. It'll just be really important for all organizations. You may have to bring someone in who's not yet in your company, or you may have to identify that person, but it is the first thing on that list for good reason, for sure.
Yeah, and just to give people an example of what that looks like, if it's not, an IT director or a security manager or something like that. I mean, this, like with the auto dealerships, for example, a lot of times that might be a controller or a CFO or even in-house legal counsel might be the qualified individual. And then they have their IT teams or their service providers that actually turn the screws and do the work. But they're the responsible parties inside. And yeah, sorry, but I'm going to do it just quickly to belabor your point, Matt, a little bit more. It's not just the government, it's the insurance providers too, because now that we've seen the whole travelers thing, the first big ransomware claim has been successfully rejected and turned around in court by travelers. So one of their customers had basically lied about implementation of MFA on their questionnaire. That so when you get your cyber policy, they give you that like 5-question or 10-question questionnaire, and some people might just say yes, 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 and just hand it in. But they actually care about that, because then when the ransomware hits and you go and submit your claim, then they're going to say, oh well, hold on a second, there was an MFA here, or there was, but it wasn't on all the applications. So it's not even just the government necessarily, but it's the insurance company, who most of the companies in this category are going to be leaning on their insurance companies to help with incident response, if not for anything else than just to pay for it. So
yeah, and MFA is absolutely, like, we've talked to insurance companies and they say if you don't have it, you're just don't even apply. You're not getting it.
Yeah,
flat out required at this point.
Let's talk about incident response. Brad, I know that you have some experience with that at FR Secure. Love to hear, if you have any tips for how folks can be handling this checkbox.
Yeah, get ahead of it. One of the things that we do, we give away a lot of resources. We have incident response claim template and playbooks for free on our website. We'll make sure you get that included. We can get that out. Start working with a company now, like we do risk registration. You can just get on board and get a call to make sure that you have information ready to go. Because the worst time to find out that you're not prepared is during an incident. It takes a lot of time and effort to do that successfully, but it can save hundreds of thousands of dollars. We had one that was really, really good on their incident, and they identified, contacted us, and we stopped a potential ransomware in 4 hours versus, others that, oh, well, we found out we were infected on Monday and it's Friday afternoon when they call, and then they're completely ransomed you know, and we had one that was completely ransom. They went to pay and the government stepped up. The FBI said, nope, they're on the list. You can't pay. I'm sorry. So just that goes back to the insurance too, right? It's not a get out of jail free card. There's travelers, as you know, they didn't pay. The FBI can tell you you can't pay. So be prepared. It'll save you so much headaches and time and money.
Yeah, let's talk about how you can save money with an incident response firm. Because if they take more time to respond to that incident, then they're going to charge you more. Matt or Chris, do you want to talk about some tips that you have for that?
Matt, why don't you go ahead and take that one?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, IR, like many things in this world, depend a lot on how prepared you are, what's happening, and what you did at the beginning of the process. And really, most importantly, what data you have available to provide to the IR company. Because if they are going to have to start from scratch and figure out what happened, everything is going to take longer. Recovery takes longer, containment takes longer, nothing is fast. So having a plan that essentially leads you into the IR process where you have data prepped, you know you're collecting it, you know you have visibility. We're all at risk to some extent. There's no like pure security situation, but the ability to say, I know if I get hit, I can provide this information to the IR company and they will be able to get visibility into what's happening in my environment and they can contain it in these different ways. And you have that built into a plan. That process goes from weeks, and especially if you know what IR company to go work with, which is another big delay part of this that I'll go into for in a sec. All of those kind of line up into an area where if your containment takes days, your recovery is going to take days beyond that as well. So it's really important to be able to move that timeline up and use that incident response plan to do that. And the knowing who your IR company is going to be is one of the most time-consuming parts of IR that we see, generally speaking, where either you'll get started or you won't go with the company that your insurance supports, or you have to wait for your insurance to bring an IR company to you, or you don't have the data in place, so all the work has to be done to pull that data out. And there's a lot of different parts of IR that if you build that plan, work through a tabletop, and you have a plan as to where you're going to go if it does happen to you, you know the IR company you're going to talk to. You've worked with them, or at least you've talked to them about what you're going to do. You know the data they're going to want. You know how you're going to contain your environment. Maybe you don't know specifically as to that attack, but you have a general idea. It will make you feel a lot more comfortable, and you will save money in the grand scheme of life when you get to IR, because your time to respond will be faster, your recovery point objective will be faster, everything will be much faster in regard to your environment. You'll be able to bring everything back up much faster. And to Brad's point, you'll also be able to respond faster. If you're responding in those first 24 hours, there's going to be a lot less pain than if you wait 72 to 96 hours. And you're like, well, everything is ransom now, so I guess we'll have to figure that out. If you get that first like Cobalt Strike hit, do something in the first 24, you'll save so much money compared to like, well, I guess we're down for the next 2 weeks and we'll just have to figure it out later. So it's one of those kind of cascading costs where if you don't spend time in the beginning identifying all those in a plan, which I know FR Secure has some great plans to work with, it is just a painful and expensive process to get your organization back up to where you would want them to be.
Two points on that too. First off, don't save all these plans that you worked on somewhere where it's going to get ransomware, because then you don't have your plan. And second off, yeah, like Matt said, be proactive on starting IR. In some cases, like when the MS Exchange thing hit, what was that, early 2021, within like a few hours, all of the IR firms that work with insurers were backed up for weeks. So if you wait to talk to your insurer and say, hey, we had a breach, then the insurer is going to it's a longer time frame before they pull in one of their approved IR firms to work with you. And the insurer might just say, you seem like you're breached. You probably shouldn't have your systems online until an IR firm can look at them. And so that means maybe you're sitting on your hands for 12 days until somebody can look at your stuff, or you take the risks and turn things on and hope that nothing goes wrong. So Yeah, when that exchange thing hit last year, I was up at like midnight talking to IR firms, and by the next day they were booked up. So being on top of it and having somebody on retainer, if you can afford that kind of thing, that gets you towards the top of the list.
Yeah, and kind of going into, some of the other parts, a lot of times they'll do the initial compromise and then just sit, because they've compromised dozens of systems or organizations. They're going to work their way through. So that's where you want to have good logging, right? We see it all the time where they get compromised, and 6 months later, 9 months later, we had one that was in there for almost a year before they activated. So have good logging. It's just absolutely critical.
Yep, for sure.
There's a statistic, and I can't remember exactly what it is, from the Verizon DBIR that says like it's like a couple hundred days on average, at least at enterprises, between the initial compromise and like when they actually, like, you find out that they've stolen everything from you, but also all your partners and service providers.
Yeah.
You see with low level 365 breaches, where you find out when they start, pulling off wire fraud on your vendors, that they've been in somebody's email account for 4 weeks. They just sit there and wait and watch and wait for the right opportunity.
Yeah.
Also,
Oh, go ahead, John.
sorry. So I just wanted to clarify, because people are going back and forth in the chat about it. The qualified individual thing. Somebody mentioned that that the FTC link says that the qualified individual can be an employee of your company or work for an affiliate or service provider, which, yes, that is technically true. So you could technically outsource the official title of qualified individual to a service provider to do all the things that you need under your program. But if you read 2 sentences after that, it basically says, or actually it exactly says, if your company brings a service provider in to implement and supervise your program, the buck still stops with you, period. It's your company's responsibility to designate a senior employee to supervise that person, blah, 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 blah. So basically, at the end of the day, you can call anybody you want the qualified individual, but the law says that, it's still your responsibility, not theirs.
You can always sue your service provider, but the government's going to go after you.
Yeah.
Right. And going back to incident response, I threw a link in there that's got a bunch of statistics, excuse me, that we've pulled from our risk registrations around who has what in terms of incident response plan. So it's an interesting read for later in the day when you want to get scared.
Erica, can you relay that link? I don't think that link went out to everybody. The link that Brad put in chat.
Sure, can do. And I'd love to, I think, there's definitely more to talk about with incident response, but for the sake of time, we do need to move on to the information access controls, disposal plan, and change management. So let's talk about that for a bit. This is essentially like an audit trail of all the changes that your organization makes, correct? Does anyone want to talk through, what some tips are? Maybe Chris, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I mean, and I think you said you'll send out this link to everybody so they can look over it. But there's going to be there's a lot in here in terms of making sure that your house is in order, both in terms of technical solutions for access controls, change management, but really this is going to be a lot of paperwork and process and procedure as well, to make sure that your change management is a big part of a mature IT operation. But yeah, having starting with the process and procedures, and then having technology solutions in place to make all this stuff work. Big one in there too, of course, is disposal plan. It's still scary how often people say that they found somebody's PII or PHI in a computer at Goodwill. Don't throw your computers in the garbage or recycle them. You got to, unfortunately, you can't just give away your old IT assets. You got to pretty thoroughly destroy some of those things in some cases to clean up. But yeah, all this stuff is really part of a mature IT operation, and making sure that you're keeping your data secure, keeping your people's rights appropriate. And if you're working with a service provider, this is a big partnership between both you and your service provider. Coming from the service provider side, it's really important that there's this trust, and there's this coordination with sometimes internal IT assets and outside IT assets, to make sure that nobody's committing changes that are outside of their authority or outside of the approval process. It's a lot of work in bigger orgs to make sure that everybody's on the same page and doing that stuff in the appropriate manner.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned working with service providers, which kind of takes us to the next checkbox here. And I'd love to hear, Brad and John, your perspectives on this as service providers yourselves. What are you expecting your customers to ask you for and make sure that you're complying with in terms of the FTC safeguards?
John, you want to go first?
Sure. So so technically the requirement is that that your service providers have to comply with essentially the same safeguards that you have, and then that you have to require them by contract to do so. So if you're dealing with a larger or mature service provider, or a service provider who is specifically a security consulting firm, they might have something much bigger than FTC safeguards, like SOC 2 or ISO 27001 or something like that. And so they might just like throw that in your face and say, get out of here, we're good. We're like 100 times that. And if they do that, that's okay. But you do need to make sure that you have that on file, know that it exists, know where it is in case of an audit, and know that it does in fact cover everything that's required. But for the most part, I can see this for smaller firms and especially for MSPs. The way that it typically will happen, at least with people that kind of like use a known working system to do it, is they might say, do you have an information security program? If the service provider says yes, then you say, okay, let me see it. And then, you can keep a copy of their security program and monitor it annually, because that's another requirement, make sure that it's still in place. If they say no, then the next step might be to give them a questionnaire. And there's lots of tools out there that can help with the questionnaires and stuff, but basically the questionnaires will ask for all of these checkboxes on this list, and say, do you do these things, do you not do these things? If they don't do any of these things, then you have to go to the next step, and basically give them a GLBA addendum to your agreement with them, or some flavor of that. You can kind of find samples of them on the internet, but basically you have to contractually obligate them to implement those things as soon as possible. And if they don't agree to that, then it's basically on you to be looking for other vendors or other service providers. So I think it's going to depend quite a bit on the size and maturity of the service provider. And like with the cases of the auto dealerships, if you're dealing with like the big providers like Cox and CDK and Fords and Toyotas and all that, like they've got ISO 27001 programs and all this stuff is no problem. But then when you go to like the IT service provider who's two guys in a garage or whatever, not that there's anything wrong with that, but those guys might not have all this stuff written down. So then you might get into the questionnaire and or contractual obligation to implement as soon as possible. So yeah, sorry, Brad.
Oh,
go ahead.
I think the other thing to keep in mind is that, first of all, get a list of all your third party.
Oh yeah, if you don't have one, yeah.
Get that list going, classify them. How much access do they have? What type of access do they have? And when you send out that questionnaire and maybe they say, we don't have this one thing, like John said, it's imperative on you to determine if you want to accept the risk, right? It could be based on the service that company provides, that what they don't have maybe isn't really relevant, but you can't just, you can just check a box and file it, but you really shouldn't, because if you accept a risk and something happens, you're going to have to defend that decision.
Especially if the vendor that submitted that questionnaire is your MSP that has remote access to all of your stuff.
Right. Yeah.
If it's somebody that you buy tires from a couple times a year, and they happen to have some customer names in their database because you've resold some stuff from them, like that's a different story.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Question go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, generally speaking, if you're trying to pass liability, stop. It will make your life harder in the grand scheme of it all. Just try to address it as much as you can. Get compensating controls if you can. Document everything. It will make your life 1,000 times better.
I always say if you're trying to do compliance, you're not always going to be secure. But if you do security
Yes.
properly, you will get to compliance.
You
Yep.
got it.
100%.
All
And
good.
quote that. This should be
So-
the title of a book.
Speaking of documentation, Matt, you bring us to the next section of the checklist and of the FTC Safeguards Rule, reports and documentation. So Brad, you mentioned kind of doing an inventory of all of your service providers, which is a great tip. Also doing a data and systems inventory is necessary to comply with this rule. What should folks keep in mind when doing a systems inventory? Are there any tools that you would all recommend to make that a little easier?
I mean, try not to use Excel. There's free tools that'll automate it and keep track of it. I mean, we see that with Excel, and it's a nightmare to keep up to date. There's going to be mistakes. Who owns it? So use some software that, like I said, there's low cost software out there that will handle this for you.
Good tip. Matt, I'd love to hear your perspective on, how Blumira kind of ties into a systems inventory in a certain way. We can kind of not necessarily give you a systems inventory, but certainly help with that, correct?
Yeah, so Blumira, because we have so much of your data, which is good. It sounds terrifying in the topic that we're talking about here, but ignoring that whole part of it, because we have so much of your data, it is a really easy way for you to get visibility into what's logging, the types of data that are logging out of that environment, and essentially the load coming out of it as well. And what we tend to do is have people pull that information out and like a scheduled report on a weekly basis. And we recommend basically a review on a weekly basis. Does this look right? Do you need to add anything to this? Did you add any new systems to this? Are you missing a VDI environment perhaps from this? What could also be added to this from a logging perspective to make sure you're getting visibility? And not just for the endpoints, of course, but also your firewalls, your switches. Do you know if someone is logging into your FortiGate? Do you know if there was a change on that FortiGate that took place? Do you know which user made that change? All of that information from a data and systems inventory, and going back to the change management requirement on the previous page, all become very important around getting that information out of Blumira. There's also a few nice ways for anyone using a SIM, Blumira or not. If you're pulling like Duo information out, you can get some good asset information out of your Duo user logins. Compare that with your actual logging devices and say, hey, we have some users that are logging in. We don't have visibility into these assets. Let's make sure that we're driving deeper and getting broader access. So Blumira can definitely get you that general information out. Blumira is not an asset inventory. I like Rumble, Run Zero. There are a whole bunch of free ones that are great as well. It's worth having a asset inventory solution for your NOT that's scanning your environment and pulling information out, because then you can get more out of your environment, which is always important. And I know we did have a question about real estate agents and realtors, and I know someone had linked in there. As far as I know, it is real estate appraisers that are associated with financial institutions and real estate settlement services that are impacted. I don't think pure realtors are impacted. However, they probably incidentally could be.
They're probably better off making sure that they avoid consumer financial data. Because realtors work through mortgage brokers, appraisers, title agencies, but as long as they act as a coordinator and say, hey, you send this to this person, instead of the realtor saying, please send me your mortgage application and then I'll forward it on to the mortgage broker. Just stay out of it. Just be the coordinator and make sure you connect the right people together. Then you can, that's a valid way to avoid compliance, is to just make sure that you're not getting in the chain of that data.
Yeah, avoid it if you can, but at the same time, you should be doing this stuff anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen really nasty attacks involving realtors because they still can instruct people to do things. But if you want to, strictly speaking, avoid being under the guise of this compliance, you can just not have that data. But there's still very high bars, and there's probably still culpability in some cases if you're not doing this kind of stuff.
And that being said, to Brad's point, I think any business should be doing this stuff anyway to some degree. Like, even if you don't have a industry leading tool for every single one of these checkboxes, this is basic business security hygiene. This regulation is not intrusive, it's not over the top, it's not, it's far from, overkill.
That's a good point, John.
This is the bare minimums, really.
Yeah.
Yes.
What we have here on this checklist, under information security program is like, this whole thing can be your information security program. It's not necessarily comprehensive, but this is a good way to get started with that program and making sure that you're kind of checking the boxes that you need to.
Mhm.
So with keeping time in mind, I'd love to talk about, with risk assessment, we can talk about that briefly. Brad, I know that you supply risk assessments to your clients. So that's a great way for people to kind of check that box, right?
Yep. Yeah. And I think with all of these, what you'll see is a lot of times, or what we've seen with other government agencies is, yes, you can do it yourself, but you risk the government saying, nope, that's not qualified. So anytime you can bring in if it's not what you do, right? If you're not a security person, if you don't have a CISSP or whatever, bring in a security service provider. It's going to give you additional defensibility, because you can say, look, we brought in an expert. Here's what they said. They gave us a roadmap and we're working towards it. That's a much better place to be in than, the head in the sand of, I didn't know. It just doesn't fly anymore.
Yeah. All good insight for sure. So again, for the sake of time, moving on to technical requirements here, I did launch a poll earlier on that said, are you enabling MFA? It looks like most folks are enabling MFA on all apps or some apps. What is the requirement here? Does it specify that MFA needs to be on apps that handle customer information, for example, on all apps? What's the expectation? Does anyone know?
So,
or go ahead, John.
Sorry. I was just gonna say, this is one of the ones that the wording bothers me a little bit, because in the regulation it says that multi-factor authentication must be implemented on all systems, like full stop. Now, if they mean that, then that means that everything down to your switches and routers and firewalls and cameras and everything have to have MFA. I don't know if that's the intent of the rule, and I think it's very likely that it's not. And we probably won't find out until somebody gets it wrong. But the conservative approach to dealing with that is MFA should be implemented on every system that has information that is subject to the protections of the rule. And that is something you need to pay very special and close attention to, because a lot of the people, so I'm not saying that anybody that any of the attendees that voted on that poll are wrong or incorrect. However, I would bet that some might be, because I see cases all the time where if you ask the simple question, do you have MFA? Somebody might come back and say, we have MFA on all our desktops. So in order to log into our computers, you need MFA, and you can't do anything else without MFA. So we're good. Well, no, you're not good, because you might have data in Google Workspace, you might have data in Microsoft 365, and I can go log in from my own computer somewhere else. So it's not, you can't just put MFA on your computers and call it a day. It has to be in front of everywhere that has the information that's subject to the rule. And so as much as people think that a third-party MFA vendor like a Duo or an Okta or something is an upsell, it really makes everybody's life easier, because not only does it make enrolling people and managing access and all that kind of managed in a single place, but it makes it easier to audit it as well. So it's very, very important that you pay attention to that.
I would say, based on what we've seen with insurance companies, they are requiring everything, like on their Active Directory servers, on every software. So one of the things that we've talked about, because some of that is just not realistic to be able to do that. It could, or it doesn't support it, right? One of the workarounds that we've been trying to get some clarification on that I think would work is, having a jump box that is MFA protected, and then allow listing only that jump box to manage your switches or routers or those different devices that don't support MFA. And it's a huge lift. I mean, I would be surprised if based on what we're seeing from insurance, if they don't mean like everything.
And that's 100% a valid workaround. And it's a big lift, but it's not a big lift compared to like,
Oh,
you know, redoing your identity architecture
yeah,
completely.
For sure.
But you have to be doing it, because I've run into car dealerships that have said, oh, well, you can't access any of our sites unless you're at the dealer. And then I'm like, are you sure? Are you like, have you actually told Google that you're only allowing access from these IP addresses? You know, so making sure that you are doing what you're saying you're doing is important here. I can't stress that enough.
Mhm.
Yeah, we're back to the days of PCI jump boxes, which, hey, I mean, we had to get back
Valid.
to that. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it worked.
And from a management perspective, you're managing software on one device versus 50 workstations. So, I mean, it actually does reduce your risk and your work, and you don't have to worry about everybody having different versions after you upgrade, right? So there are some benefits to it.
But you do have to be segmented.
Yes.
Yes.
Whole
Just
bigger
wanted to
conversation.
again, for the sake of time, sorry to keep us moving along, but I have to. So penetration testing and vulnerability assessments and continuous monitoring. What is Brad, what's your interpretation of the difference between all three of these? Do companies need to implement all three, or can they kind of supplement one with the other?
Yeah, well, it's still, so even if you have continuous monitoring with like a Blumira or whatever, it's still a best practice to do a pen test and vulnerability scans, but you're going to find issues much faster if you do have that continuous monitoring. And what they're saying is, if you have it, okay, you don't have the requirement to do the pen test or that vulnerability scan, but best practice is still annual pen testing. And really, with some of the agents out there, if you could do monthly or quarterly vulnerability scans, it's minimal effort for a potentially significant payoff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for delving into that a little bit. For the sake of time, again, I do want to jump to monitoring and logging authorized and suspicious activity. Blumira is able to check that box, which is nice, especially for small teams that don't necessarily have a lot of resources to implement a large SIM, for example, like Splunk. Matt, I'd love to hear your perspective on what this requirement exactly entails and how Blumira helps to check that box for customers.
Sure, yeah. So Blumira, like many SIMs, allow you to send us your identity information, your login information. And really where this tends to catch people, and where we see it catch people, not necessarily related to the safeguard, but in the spirit of monitoring and logging authorized suspicious activity, which you see across everywhere. Every standard at this point is going to expect you to do this. And the hardest part that we tend to see is not necessarily like, do I include my Active Directory, but more, do I have enough coverage that I'm seeing the actual suspicious activity from all of my endpoints and everywhere people can authenticate into my environment? So do you have your VPNs properly covered? Do you have your VMware Horizon server properly covered? Do you have VDI properly covered? Are you getting logs from that random machine that someone was able to log into locally, unrelated to your Active Directory server? And those tend to be the parts where we see the most complexity of getting the right logs in from an identity perspective. That being said, making sure you're getting your SaaS logs in. If you're on M365, making sure you're seeing the Azure AD just as much as your authentication logs broadly. And I'm fairly sure, correct me if I'm wrong, the MFA requirement is associated with SaaS as well. So making sure that you are seeing the types of authentication coming in as well, which is to say you want to see when there's a single factor authentication through Azure or through M365. And for those of you on Google, you may or may not know this already, but authentication logging in Google Workplace is miserably bad. It's not very good, generally speaking. You don't get a lot of granularity out of it. So you really want to make sure you're getting as much information as possible from a suspicious and authorized perspective. If you want to be able to detect someone password spraying against your environment, the only way to do it is collect every single piece of authentication log in that environment and evaluate that data. And for Blumira, just to be very quick about this, the way we approach is by basically saying, send us literally every log you can find, and we will evaluate that log and tell you if something weird is going on. And for those of you not on Blumira, make sure you are evaluating each and all parts of your environment and get as much as you can from an authentication perspective logged and monitored. Because in my experience, what tends to happen, and as like a general breach, what has happened in my past, it tends to be the weirdest place that you get owned. And it usually is the place you didn't think to log from or look at. So like FortiGate with LDAP enabled, facing the internet without MFA enabled on a VPN. Those are the areas where you're going to get hit more often than your 2FA Duo VPN. Like it's just more than likely. And those weird areas are why you want to try to log as much as possible out of every single piece of your environment. And find a SIM that will help you do that is really the best way to do that.
And just to add to that, where we typically see most points of egress is still users. It's social engineering. So don't forget your workstations, because that's going to be the initial point of ingress the vast majority of the time.
Yep, and just to super quickly add to that, one of the best ways to ensure that you have coverage across all of that stuff is a penetration test or vulnerability scans, because specifically in a penetration test, the tester is going to try to find the places that you aren't logging and monitoring, and everything that you are, you're going to get, alerting or, be able to review the logs. And secondly, technically you could meet this monitor and log authorized and suspicious activity by reviewing logs in Google and reviewing logs in Microsoft 365 and going, weekly, quarterly, whatever, and reading that stuff. If that's your plan, that's fine. However, you 100% try a trial of Blumira or do the free tier for M365, and just because if you do this right, it's going to take a lot of your time. So
there's a reason why PCI took away the option to manually review logs, because it's impractical.
Because you won't do it.
It's insane. It's pure insanity. Like it was insane when PCI recommended people do it. It's still insane now. It's always been crazy. Like there's too much data for a human to look at.
And one thing I would recommend that's not enabled by default from an incident response perspective is PowerShell script block logging, because what we're seeing is encoded PowerShell going and doing reverse pulls, webhooks, and downloading from there. So if you can catch that, it's typically a sign, although some MSPs do use encoded PowerShell in their scripts, which drives us nuts. But that's usually a sign of something potentially going on. And the second thing on that, is if we have that encoded PowerShell at the start of an incident, we can tell you what they were doing versus waiting until we get stuff deployed and hoping we catch it. And that difference of looking at that and taking a couple of minutes to decode it versus hours could be the difference in being ransomed or not.
Those are all good tips. And I wanted to quickly talk about the retention aspect of a SIM as well. Chris, I know that you had mentioned that how many days of log retention you can access on demand comes into play here. Love to hear about why that is.
Yeah, I think John might mention it. Somebody mentioned about the Verizon reports. Verizon puts out a great report every year on kind of the state of security. One of the metrics they look at is average time between attacker entry into a network and the attacker being discovered in the network. And this is something we're seeing insurers ask about, other compliance regimes asking about, but basically saying we want to look back far enough to see when the attacker entered your environment, because we want to know how long they've been in there, what data they touched. These are all important things to basically limit the scope of investigation, determine how much data could have been accessed or stolen. So yeah, having a long-term data retention plan for your logs is really important. And like I said, it's becoming required in some cases. You'll probably start to see insurers either deny coverage or base risk and premium prices based on how much log data you're holding. Because if you're logging, but you're holding the logs for a week, that's pretty much worthless. You may be able to detect an attacker when they enter your network. But if it's a more sophisticated attack where the attacker sits really dormant for a long period of time, it's going to be really hard to determine how long they're in your environment if your logs are short term. Also, keep in mind things like, if you have a month of log retention, but it happens over Christmas, you have a breach. That's 1 week out of your month of data retention that might be gone because nobody was there, at that time to monitor things and to start pulling data out of your system, pulling logs out of your system.
We quoted the IBM report. 179 days is the average dwell time before detection. So 6 months.
Yep. So if you're doing anything over 6 months, they got away with a lot.
Yeah, and honestly, a minimum of a year of logs is what I would want to see.
And I forgot to mention the other important thing about having long-term data logging is so you can determine how the attacker got in your environment. Because if you can't figure out how they got in your environment and you kick them out and restore, your vulnerability in your VPN appliance or some other system might still be there, and somebody else is going to walk by, find it, and then breach you again.
Those are all good points. And we do offer 1 year of data retention for our cloud and advanced pricing plans here at Blumira. So that's certainly good to know. I'd love to go over, what we check the box with in terms of FTC safeguards. We fully check that monitor and log authorized and suspicious activity. That is what we do as a cloud SIEM built for small teams. So we do collect all of that log information. We have the built-in detections, and we also offer those step-by-step response playbooks to help you understand exactly what to do in the event of an incident, which is really helpful, again, for those small teams that might not have as many resources. And then we do help support a few of these checkboxes, the penetration testing and vulnerability assessments. We do offer a lot of detections that a lot of other SIEMs don't that would help you pass a pen test. And we encourage all of our customers to test our SIEM to make sure that you will pass that penetration test. For data encryption, we encrypt all the data collected from your systems in transit and at rest. We can also help you look for and eliminate those legacy protocols in your environment. And we also help with access controls and an incident response plan by having all of that log information right at your fingertips, so that when you do hire an incident response team, it makes it much easier for them to go through that checklist and really understand what they need to do in order to recover and help you recover from that event. So I will launch a poll here asking if you want to talk more with Blumira, JTI Cybersecurity, or FR Secure. Brad, I'd love to hear a little bit about what you do as at FR Secure, and kind of give folks here the chance to learn a little bit more about your company.
Sure. Yeah, we are a information security company. That's all we do. We don't do hands-on keyboard. We do virtual CISO. We do risk assessments. Any of those governance, readiness type of activities. We do have a fairly robust incident response team, and then we have our pen testing team. We do red teaming, internal, external web app. We'll do blue teaming. We'll do purple teaming. And one thing from our side is we are vendor and product agnostic. That is important to us. So if you see us out somewhere talking, it's because we think it's a good fit. We're never going to get kickback or take payment for recommending a product. So
excellent. Very cool. Well, if you'd like to work a little bit more with FR Secure, if you have any more questions for Brad here, feel free to check that box in the poll that's launched right now. And John, tell me a little bit about JTI Cybersecurity. What do you guys do, and what do you offer to your clients?
So yeah, we're actually a very similar firm to FR Secure. So we're just a security consulting firm. We're not an MSP. We don't do IT support. We don't try to sell you products. We have a couple folks, including myself, that are former DoD employees. So we have a lot of really cool offensive experience that we can bring to red team engagements and penetration testing. So that's kind of our forte. And we actually, like on the incident response side of things, we generally refer that to folks like FR Secure who have a lot of experience with IR and forensics and that kind of stuff. But in general, we do a lot of the same type of governance type work, helping people put their programs together, getting a GRC tool set up, ensuring that you've got a gap analysis and risk assessments to support compliance, all that sort of stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that overview, John. And again, if you'd like to talk more with John or JTI Cybersecurity, feel free to select that in the poll. Well, we got through it in an hour. We got through, I think, most of the things on that checklist. So I'm impressed, guys. Way to go. And, covering all of that. I know it's very comprehensive. And just as a reminder to our attendees here, we will be sending along a copy of that PDF for your own use, and we will follow that up in an email after the webinar ends. I hope that you all got some information and learned a little bit about what you can do to prepare for that deadline. As a reminder, it is December 9th, 2022. So definitely coming up in just under 2 months. So get started on that, on all of these safeguards that you need to implement in your organization. All the companies here on this webinar can help you with that to some degree, and feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thanks everyone for your participation, and thanks to our panelists for hopping on and giving some great insight today and some great tips.
Thanks for keeping us on task.
Yeah.
Thank you. We could have gone
That's my
hours,
job.
dude.